All right, so today we're going to break down a case that seriously feels like it was ripped from a Hollywood script. We're talking about a brutal quadruple murder, a prime suspect who had every reason to do it, and an alibi that seemed absolutely 100% flawless. This is the story of how just one, relentless detective took that perfect alibi apart, piece by piece. Okay, let's dive in.
You know, this quote from one of the investigators, it really gets right to the heart of our story. It sets the tone right from the very beginning, asking that central question. Can a killer truly commit a murder and leave absolutely no trace, no crack in their story? Well, we're about to find out.
So our story kicks off in a pretty small town with a crime scene that was, let's just say, anything but simple. The first clues weren't about what the killer took, but what they left behind. And what they left behind was a very clear and very bloody message.
So the 911 call comes in, and it's frantic. A company owner, a guy named Phil Dasso, he just stumbled upon a horrific scene at his business, Erie Manufacturing. Inside, police found 4 bodies: his son, his daughter, his son-in-law, and his business partner. For a small town like Bartow, this was the worst mass murder the county had ever seen. Just unbelievable.
Right off the bat, things just didn't add up. The office was a complete mess, drawers pulled out, papers thrown everywhere. It was clearly staged to look like a robbery. But here's the thing that just didn't sit right with the cops. The victims were still wearing expensive jewelry. Laptops and other valuables left behind. This wasn't about money. No way. This was personal.
Okay, so to figure out what really went down, investigators turned to the blood on the walls. Now, blood-stain pattern analysis is a pretty fascinating field. Seriously, every single drop tells a story. By looking at the angle and the shape of the blood spatter, these experts can literally reconstruct where the victims were and where the killer was standing. And this is where the forensics just blew the case wide open. The analysis showed that all the blood spatter was low to the ground, on the walls. The victims hadn't been in some kind of struggle. No, they were likely forced to the ground and then shot, execution style, one after another. This wasn't some random robbery gone wrong. This was a calculated, cold-blooded assassination.
So now they're thinking this was a professional hit, which means investigators needed a suspect with a powerful motive. And you know what? It didn't take them long at all to find a man who had every reason in the world to want these 4 people dead.
So, let me introduce you to Nelson Serrano. He was the third partner at the manufacturing company, and things had ended badly. Really badly. He accused his partners of stealing, slapped them with a $1 million lawsuit, and then was promptly voted out of the very company he helped build. Oh, and his son got fired too. To top it all off, Serrano was a gun expert. He owned 37 firearms, and a lot of them were the same .22 caliber used in the murders. I mean, the motive was basically gift-wrapped for them.
So this is where investigators hit a huge wall. On one hand, you've got a perfect motive. Revenge, money, humiliation, it's all there. But on the other hand, you have what looked like a perfect alibi. Because when they questioned Serrano, he claimed he was 500 miles away in Atlanta, Georgia, on the day of the murders. And get this, he had proof. Police in Atlanta went to his hotel and pulled the security footage. And there he was, clear as day, in the lobby at 12:20 in the afternoon, and then again that night at 10:17 p.m. The murders happened sometime after 5 p.m. So how could he possibly be in 2 places at once? With this video, it looked like Nelson Serrano was totally in the clear. And just like that, the case went cold. But for one investigator, a special agent named Tommy Ray, something about that alibi, it just didn't feel right. He couldn't shake this nagging feeling that they were missing something obvious. So he decided to take another, much closer look at that so-called perfect alibi.
And here's where things get really interesting. You see, where everyone else saw 2 timestamps that cleared Serrano, investigator Tommy Ray saw something totally different. A gap. A huge gap. A nearly 10-hour window between 12:20 p.m. and 10:17 p.m. where nobody, not one person, saw or heard from Nelson Serrano.
And that was the question that changed everything. Serrano's story was that he had a migraine and just stayed in his room all day. But was it physically possible for him to have made that round trip? On paper, it seemed insane, almost impossible. But Tommy Ray decided there was only one way to know for sure. So he did it himself. Ray literally mapped out the entire crazy journey. And it wasn't simple. It involved 2 different airports in Florida. Why? Because flight schedules showed there were no return flights from Orlando that were late enough. So the killer would have had to rent a car in Orlando, drive to Bartow, commit the murders, then drive to a completely different airport in Tampa just to catch a flight back to Atlanta.
And the result? Absolutely stunning. Ray physically recreated the entire journey, timing every single leg of it. He drove to the airport, he got on the flight, he rented the car, he drove to the crime scene, then drove to the next airport and flew back. And when he finally walked back into that Atlanta hotel lobby, he checked his watch. He had made it with 20 minutes to spare. The impossible was, in fact, possible.
Okay, so Ray had just proven that Serrano had the opportunity, but could've isn't enough to convict someone, right? He still had zero physical evidence, no smoking gun that actually placed Serrano in the state of Florida on that specific day.
So they started digging into flight records, and they found tickets bought with cash under some pretty suspicious names. A Juan Aggio flew from Atlanta to Orlando. Well, a tip from one of the victim's family members revealed that Serrano had a son named Juan from a past relationship, and the mother's maiden name was Aggio. Bingo. The return flight from Tampa booked under John White. John, the English version of Juan, and White Industries, one of Serrano's biggest clients. I mean, the connections were just too good to be a coincidence, but it's still circumstantial.
But it still wasn't enough. They needed one piece of undeniable physical proof. They needed something that Serrano had to have touched, something that could only exist if he was physically standing right there. But what on earth could that possibly be?
And that's when Tommy Ray had this flash of memory from his own test run. When he rented the car, he had to take a little paper parking ticket to get out of the garage. He realized Serrano would have done the exact same thing. So he and his team went to the Orlando Airport Parking Authority and started what seemed like an impossible task, searching through mountains of old, unsorted parking tickets.
I mean, can you imagine going through box after box, ticket by ticket for hours on end? It was the definition of a needle in a haystack search. And then finally, they found it. A single ticket from the exact day of the murders, stamped with the license plate of the car Serrano's nephew had rented for him. It was their eureka moment.
So they rushed this ticket to the lab, and forensics was able to lift a single, clear thumbprint right off the paper. They ran it against their suspect's file, and it was a perfect match. Nelson Serrano. That was it. That was the physical proof that destroyed his entire story. He wasn't sick in a hotel room in Atlanta. He was at the Orlando airport on the day of the murders. And just like that, the perfect alibi was absolutely shattered.
So now they have it. That one forensic link they needed. Investigators were finally ready to make their arrest. But their suspect was a savvy businessman, and he had no intention of facing justice. The chase was far from over.
By the time they actually secured an indictment, Serrano was long gone. He'd fled to his home country of Ecuador. And here's the crazy twist. Ecuadorian law at the time protected its own citizens from extradition. It looked like he was totally home free. But you gotta know, Tommy Ray wasn't about to give up. He discovered this brilliant loophole. Serrano had entered Ecuador on his U.S. passport, signing in as an American. Because of that, he could be deported as an American citizen, which completely bypassed the extradition laws. 4 long years after the killings, Tommy Ray finally got his man.
So in the end, Nelson Serrano was found guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. This final quote really says it all. Serrano was absolutely convinced he had planned and executed the perfect crime. And without the relentless, obsessive determination of one investigator who just refused to believe what he saw in a security tape, he probably would have gotten away with it. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many perfect crimes are still out there just waiting for the right person